Hello, everyone. It is so nice to see so many smiling virtual faces joining us for another webinar this week. Um, I am joined today by my colleague David. David, how are you today?
Hi everybody, I'm good. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're looking good.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Hello everybody. I'm glad you could all make it today.
Oh, fab. So we're going to be talking today about sort of test strategy. The admissions tests are coming up. I think some of them as soon as next week. And so I'm going to be walking through some particular approaches that I think are really useful and hopefully will be helpful to those of you who've got those tests coming up. Some of them may be a little bit counterintuitive, maybe a little bit different from the approach you've been taking to revision. So hopefully there'll be a little bit of fun as far as that goes as well. Oh, and next week we're going to be talking, because next week will be what we'll be talking, I think, 5 hours before the personal statement deadline. 4 hours, very close. So we'll be looking at the absolute final touches you might want to make at that point, unless of course we change our minds and do something else. But that's the plan as it stands. The first thing to say is, if you are new to sort of the work we do at UniAdmissions, you will perhaps not be aware of how much emphasis we put on admissions tests and how important our research has shown them to be in practice. So what we found is that they really are the biggest contribution to your chances of success. This is an extract taken from the PPE admissions manual at Oxford. So this is the very long document that interviewers are working from when they are making decisions about who to make offers to and who not to. And that document includes this ranking of the different components of the application. And what you see here is that the admissions test is right there at the top, and the most important thing, more important than your A-level predictions or than your GCSEs, and that your personal statement is right down there at the bottom, less important even than the reference you're getting from your school. So with a week to go on the personal statements, hopefully that's a little bit of comfort to know that if it still doesn't feel quite right, it isn't the end of the world, because it isn't perhaps as big a deal as you might have thought. Now, the reasoning behind this, why the admissions tests are so important, is sort of there are a number of parts to it we're going to sort of work through. The first thing to take into account is the situation with A-levels. Because of the pandemic and the way that students were assessed over not this most recent year, but the 2 previous, the proportion of students who were getting an A or an A star at A-level really went up. Now, this isn't a bad thing for the students concerned. Obviously, better grades are better, but it does make life more difficult for the universities, because the purpose of the A-level grades from their point of view is to be able to compare students, so to see which students are very good and which students are excellent. Now, if 40% of students are achieving A's and A stars, it becomes very difficult to tell within that 40% which of those students are the best, because there is only so much information available. And so what we tend to do, and I'm hoping David will be able to run us through this, is try and express this in the form of pie chart. David, are you happy with a pie chart?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, give it a go. I'll still be here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the way, I mean, and already I'm thrown by the pie chart. It looks different to what I have in my head, but there we go. So, so the way that I explain it when I'm on the phones is that there are 4 components to your application. The first one being your personal statement. That is worth about 10% of your application. And then you have the second component, being your exams. So that's your GCSEs and your predicted grades for your A levels. They're also worth about 10%. And then we have your test. So for most things, that's if you're doing medicine, that's your Bmap, your UCAT, and lots of other tests that I have to memorize, and I'm not going to try and recount now. But that's worth about 40% of your application. And then finally, we have your interview, which again, if you're going to Oxford or Cambridge, everybody has to do an interview, and that's worth about 40% as well.
Spot on. Don't know what you were worried about.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about here is that these components happen in an order. You've already done your GCSEs, you've very nearly finished the personal statement, you've got the admissions test coming up, and then after that is the interview. So looking at this, what you see is that you still have a lot of control over the outcome of your application. Something like 75% of it is still stuff you haven't done yet. Even now, when your interview might only be in 8 or 9 weeks' time, you still have a lot of control over what's going on. So I think that's really important to bear in mind, particularly as we look at these tests today. To remember that you still have a lot of control over what happens. You are not locked in on the basis of your GCSE scores or your personal statement or anything like that. There's a lot of scope for you to improve your situation. I'd forgot what I put down as my headers in here. So the next thing to bear in mind is that Oxford and Cambridge are more competitive now than they ever have been. And offer rates have been going fairly steadily down for the past 10 years or so. This means that because there's more competition, these admissions tests are more important, because these tests are the only piece of information that the universities have to work on that is the same for everyone who's applying. Some students will be applying with A-levels, some students with Scottish Highers, some people will be applying with an Irish Leaving Cert, some people coming from France with a baccalaureate, people from Germany with an Abitur. People will be applying to various subjects with having done different exams, having studied different things. And so the only piece of information that is the same for every student the university has to work off is this test. Now, that can sound a little bit scary, but the other thing to remember is the competition is higher, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it has got harder to get in. I know it sounds a little paradoxical, but the thing to remember is the more people are applying, the new people who come in, so the extra applicants, are generally of lower quality, and so the applicant quality doesn't rise as fast as the number of applicants does, if that makes sense, because inevitably the students who are increasing the numbers are students who are less likely to get in, because all the students who are most likely to get in were already applying. I'm gonna have to do a graph for this one. It's I feel like I'm struggling to explain myself. So as we mentioned earlier, you've still got that 75%-ish chance, 75% control over your chance of getting in. And so putting your energy into the right place in terms of the admissions test can make a really big difference. So what I wanted to do here was do a little bit of a quiz. So I mentioned a moment ago that admissions offer rates have been going down, but if people would like him to drop into the chat what they think the offer rate currently is. So what percentage of people who apply to Oxford or Cambridge do you think are offered a place? Just drop a number into the chat, you know, whatever you think it is, whether that's you think 100% of people get an offer, which I suspect is not the case, or that 0% of people get an offer, which would be strange because I don't know how they'd get any students that way. But hopefully you just want to drop that into the chat. We can get a few guesses and then reveal the answer, which might be fun. So I will leave that for a minute. Here we go. Oh, they're starting to come in. Fab. interestingly, everyone has gone for a lower than the actual answer. So the offer rate for Cambridge is about 19% these days. It was over 25% as recently as 2016. And the offer rate at Oxford is now down to about 14%. And again was about 5 points higher back in 2016. So the good news is, all of you who were guessing, we had guesses of 10%, 5%, 15%. All of you have suddenly, your chances have just gone way up relative to your expectations. Things have already improved a lot for you. Now, one reason we'll have got such sort of low guesses is because there's a lot of variation between subjects. The number of students applying for a given subject varies a lot. So there will be more than 20 students applying for every place to study computer science at Cambridge, incredibly popular course. And a similar sort of rate for students applying for PPE as well. Just really popular course, loads of students applying. And so the number of places doesn't change based on popularity, so those are just really competitive subjects. But there are sort of odd nuances based on subject choice as well. So it is more than twice as hard to get into Oxford to study biochemistry as it is to study chemistry. Quite why chemistry has become so unfashionable, I don't know. Must be that bio bit must really make it much more exciting. And students applying to study medicine are twice as likely to get into Cambridge as they are to Oxford. Now, the interesting thing there is, this isn't driven by the number of students applying at all. This is just down to the fact that Cambridge has a much larger medical school and takes on almost twice as many students as Oxford. So if you are applying for medicine, Cambridge has more places, and people don't seem to know this. So they're still applying to Oxford, even though their odds are a little bit longer there. And there are also subjects that are just less competitive because there are just fewer students applying to study them. There were only about 150 students applying last year to study classics at Cambridge, and there are about 60 places available there. No, more than 60, I think. That doesn't make sense based on my own numbers. About 70 or so. And so we see that nearly half of the students who are applying to study classics get in. This is particularly embarrassing for me because when I applied to Oxford to study classics 15 years ago, I didn't get in. And it looks like almost everyone else did based on these numbers, because if it's 48% now and it's only been getting harder, it must have been really easy when I applied. So I must have been very stupid. It's the only possible explanation, really. Having taken all of that into account, let's have a look at some questions. Improving your admissions test score is all about getting the right approach to the question. So what we can do is we're going to look at two questions. One is a verbal reasoning question. One is a numerical reasoning question. And these are taken from recent Bmap papers. So these are the real thing. So what I'm going to do is you will get in the exam, roughly, I think you get an hour to do 32 questions on the Bmap. I think that's right. Is it an hour? Just double check. David, can you remember the timings for the Bmap? I'll look off the top of my head.
The timings for the Bmats, yes, I can tell you that actually.
So brilliant.
You've got 60 minutes for section 1, and then you have 30 minutes for section 2, and then 30 minutes for section 3. So I think you have to do all of them for both universities. So yeah, so 2 hours in total.
Perfect. And I was right. It is 32 questions in 60 minutes. So that is, anyone who can do maths will tell you, almost exactly 2 minutes a question. And so what I'm going to do is, you should be able to see I'm going to launch a little poll. What you can do is, I'll give you 2 minutes to have a look at the question and see if we can get a correct answer. So we'll start with question 1, and then we'll come back and do question 2 in a moment. So the poll should be up and available for you to pop your answer in. And I will give you 2 minutes. I've got a stopwatch. You won't see it, but I will, because I don't know how to put a stopwatch in a PowerPoint presentation. That's one for next time, maybe. And we'll see how things go. Is everybody ready? Well, no one's complaining because all the microphones are off. Off we go. Cool. And you're all out of time. It's not very long, is it? I think is the first thing that we noticed there. 2 minutes really isn't very long to try and answer as long a question as that. And so the thing we want to be able to do, and I'm going to go through the answer in a moment. The thing we really want to be able to do with a question like this is to, if we can't get to the answer within the 2 minutes, what you want to be able to do is make sure that you are making a good guess. So we'll go through this one because this is a relatively interesting one, I think. So what we've got is we've got 5.6. You'll enjoy my handwriting. It's a very bad. And that's our answer. And we know that 5.6 equals 1 watermelon, 1 sandwich, and 1 crisps. And a sandwich is 2 crisps in terms of price, and a watermelon is 2 sandwiches. So what we do is we can say that that's crisps is 1. We now know that the sandwich costs 2 crisps, so that's 2 crisps. 2 crisps. Undo that bit, plus 2 crisps, and plus a watermelon. The watermelon costs 2 sandwiches, the sandwiches cost 2 crisps, so that must be 4 crisps. So we see that we've got a total of 7 crisps. So 7 crisps equals 5.6. We can therefore see that this is what I actually have to do. This is where I get slowed down because I haven't got a calculator. That C equals 80p. And so we want to know the price of the watermelon. We know that a watermelon is 4C. 4C is £3.20, which is answer D. Now, even with my terrible handwriting, that takes a little bit of time to work out, right? So what can we do to speed this process up? The first thing we can do is we can start trying to eliminate some of these answers. So we know that the total amount is 5.6, and we know that the watermelon is the most expensive thing. Now, if it's the most expensive thing, is it likely to only be £1.20? £1.20 is, well, if it's only £1.20, then you've got £4.40 left over after you pay for the watermelon, and it's supposedly the most expensive thing, and there are only two other things. If you look at the £4.40 you've got left, and that would mean that both those things would be £2.20 each, which isn't more expensive than £1.20. So you can rule out £1.20. You've been told that one of them is twice the price of the other. So the £2.20 each, that still doesn't work. And if the watermelon costs £3.60, then you've only got £2 left for the other two. And you can see that you don't end up with a nice number if you do that, because dividing 2 by 3 ends up with some really awkward figures. And so that is probably not the answer. So I would say a little bit of common sense, and you can narrow it down to 2 options. And if you're running short on time, that's kind of the approach you want to take. The important thing isn't always going to be getting the answer right. The important thing is going to be make sure that you have increased your chances of getting it right if you guess, if that makes sense. So let's have a look at a second question. Have a look at the verbal questions. So I will pop another poll up, and we'll all give this one a go, hopefully. It will be easier. Maybe it won't be, who can say? So we've got another poll that is up and running, and I will see you all in 2 minutes. And that's time. Well done, everyone. I can see a lot more people were able to answer this one in time, which is a great sign. When you're practicing with these questions, this is something that's really helpful to keep an eye on. If you know that you are quicker on one set of questions than the other, look at the rate at which you're getting those questions right. If you are able to do the verbal questions in 1 minute and 45 seconds, 1 minute and 30 seconds rather than in 2 minutes, and you're still getting a good level of them right, then you can slightly rebalance the way you're spending your time when it comes to the test itself. If you know that if you find that you are doing them quickly, but you're doing badly, then you want to focus your revision there and give them more time. And if you find that you are doing them more slowly, but well, you want to look at whether that's the best use of your time. If spending an extra 20 seconds on a verbal question really increases your chance of getting it right, then you want to rebalance the way you're using your time in favor of them. So let's look at these. So look first at the answers we've been given. With these verbal questions, it's often a good idea to read the answers before you read the text. That means you know what you're looking for before you start, because what you're going to do, if you do it the traditional way, is you're going to read the text, then you're going to read the answers, then you're going to read the text again. If you're stuck for time, then reading the answers first means you don't have to read the text twice. So let's have a look. We're told that the candidate is a slow eater. And Simon argues that this will reduce their productivity since they'll be inclined to take longer lunch breaks. So let's have a look here at the options we've been given. So slow eaters will take longer lunch breaks is our first option. Now, does this support Simon's argument, or is it just a recap of Simon's argument? In the last sentence, Simon says, slow eat. He says he'll be inclined to take longer lunch breaks, and this is because he is a slow eater. So this isn't really supporting the argument, it's just making the same point again. B, I think, is a slightly better answer, but there's no mention of whether lunch breaks are a distraction or not. Lunch breaks are tied specifically to productivity. There's no mention of distractions elsewhere in the text, so we can ignore that one. D is a kind of big picture sort of moral claim almost. Eating slowly is a weakness. I suppose this is definitionally, this is sort of true because this is what the candidate has said, but I think it's a bit much for us to make a big judgment like that. If in questions like this you find yourself faced with a really big claim like this, it's hardly ever the answer. And E, eating slowly will lead to less time to work efficiently. This is subtly different from C, and these are the two, I think, the two best answers. So we need to see which of these actually support Simon's point. Simon's point is that productivity will be reduced. Now, hopefully, we know what productivity is, which is productivity is work divided by time. And so what we're seeing here is that productivity will be reduced. Eating slowly will reduce the time available to work. So if the time available to work goes down, we can expect that the work will be done less efficiently. And so I think we can happily go with answer C. But again, the trick here is to start ruling options out. If you get to the point where you are 50-50 to get the points because you're choosing between C and E, that is a much better use of your time than spending an extra 2 or 3 minutes really figuring the question out, because you might need that time to look at another question. This is really the key thing to bear in mind here with these tests. And the reasoning behind this is simple. Your chance of getting the mark is always going to be 1 divided by the number of options there are. For the Bmap, there are 5 options for each question in these multiple choice sections. And so that means you always have a 20% chance of getting the answer right. Now, if you can get one answer, that pushes your chances up to 25%. Another answer, 33%. And ruling out another answer up to 50%. So you can increase your chances by 30% just by eliminating eliminating the 3 answers that you don't think are the right ones. Obviously, you want to get all the answers right, but getting 50% of them right is also pretty good. That would have you, and we'll look at this later, not a million miles off the average Bmap student, actually. If we're thinking about your performance at the margin, if you're trying to squeeze out an extra 2 or 3 points, increasing your chances from 33% to 50% mean that across 10 questions, you're going to be getting 5 extra marks and 3 extra marks, and possibly more depending on how the probabilities fall. These are just averages after all. And so that is going to make a much bigger difference to your performance than necessarily getting an extra question right is, just improving the quality of your guess. So to make this a little bit clearer, I have put this forward in the form of another little problem. I'm just doing loads of these today, aren't I? So we have 4 students in the style of a philosophy question. These students are helpfully called A, B, C, and D. Helps it to make it nice and easy to see that they are nice and abstract. So which of these students do you think is going to get the highest mark in section 1 of the Bmap based on the information you've been given? Who do you think is going to do the best? And I've popped another poll up as well for you. There's no time limit on this one because this isn't an entirely serious question. But just to summarize, Amy does the test slowly. She's getting 90% of the questions right, but she only gets through 27 of them. So the last 5 questions she doesn't manage to answer. Brad, by contrast, he rushes. He only gets 80% of the question right, but he does finish the test. Charlotte is a little bit anxious. She gets 80% right in the first half of the test, but in the second half she's rushing. She hasn't got enough time left, and so she only gets 75% right and doesn't get to the last question at all. David, meanwhile, he gets 90% of the questions right in the math section, but only 80% in the verbal section, and doesn't answer the last 2 questions. So we have a range of different students who have attempted the test in different ways. You can do slowly at a high level of performance. You can rush at a slightly lower level of performance. You might find that your performance varies depending on the time that's passed, or you might find that you have a definite difference in terms of your ability between different sections of the test. Now, what we see is that in terms of test scores, even though Amy was getting 90% of the questions right, because she doesn't manage to finish the exam, she still finishes the second worst in terms of her performance. She still does better than Charlotte, but the 2 chaps, Brad and David, are both doing better. And surprisingly, Brad, who is rushing the test and only getting 80% of the questions right, he gets the highest mark because he's managed to finish the test. That 80% chance of getting it right on each question really adds up and means that he's obviously enough going to get 80% of the marks. Those extra questions he's answering are actually more valuable than having a higher success rate as Amy does. And David's approach, even where he has he's weaker in one section than the other, again, getting through all the questions makes a really big difference. The thing to bear in mind here as well is that you will always have a 20% chance of getting the question right. And so we're looking at increasing your chances from 20%. So an 80%, getting the question right 80% of the time isn't as unrealistic as it might sound when you consider that even if you weren't trying, you could get 20%. You could probably get 20% in the Bmap in about 6 or 7 minutes, because all you would have to do is answer A to every question, and probably you will get 20%. You might get 18%, you might get 22%. It'll depend on how the answers have been distributed in that particular test, but that's what the maths tell us. So if we look at this in real context, we're going to have a look at the distribution of marks for the Bmap back in, I think this is the 2019 edition. What you'll see is, as we mentioned before, having a 50% chance of getting each question right gets you in here in the 16 out of 32 column. Now, what you'll see is that you're pretty much slap bang in the middle. The average student is getting roughly half the questions right. So you're looking at a kind of a 50% probability. But each of those extra correct answers is pushing you up ahead of another 5% of all of the candidates who are sitting the exam. So your chances of your position in the ranking, you're going from right in the middle at 50% up to 55 and 60% with just 2 extra correct answers. Now we know that out of 32, 2 extra correct answers, that's well within your power in terms of making good guesses. That's 4 questions at a 50% chance. If you're not getting to all the questions, you're not getting those chances. If you're not giving each of the questions enough time, if you're not being smart with the way you allocate your planning, you're not going to be able to pull that off. The other interesting thing here is if we look at, the probability continues to be interesting, the students who are scoring 6, which we remember is what you would get if all you did was answer A to every question. There are still students, not very many of them, but something like 2, maybe even, I could say about 2% of students are scoring worse than you would score just by guessing. Now, these may be students who have been unable to finish the test, who have panicked, who have had problems of that kind. But you can see here that there are still some students who are performing worse than just guessing. Now, some of them will be unlucky because, of course, there's a whole probability distribution either side of 6. And I think we can all feel very sorry for the few people who managed to get 2, which is much worse than guessing and is probably a mixture of bad luck and things just having gone really badly in terms of their guesses as well. But what we see here is that the improvement in your test scores you can get from increasing your chances of getting the answer right, in addition to just getting the answer right, can make a really big difference in terms of your positioning. So to sort of summarize this, because I feel we've been going a little bit long. And those annotations are still, let's get rid of those, that's ugly. Remember, all of the questions in the exam are equally important. You will get 1 mark for getting question 1 right, and you'll get 1 mark for getting question 32 right. Now, the chances of you giving as much time to question 32 as to question 1, most people don't. Most people are running out of time by the point they get to the end of the test. Try and avoid that. Those questions at the back, the easiest question on the whole exam might be the last question. It might only take you 30 seconds. You might see it and go, I know what the answer is without even thinking about it. Now, if you never get to that question because you run out of time, then that's really unfortunate. That was your question. It was made for you. You really want to avoid that outcome. Make sure you get to all the questions, give them equal time. If you're running even only 10 or 20 seconds over on a question, just guess and move on. If it's a true guess, if you haven't managed to narrow down your options, before you go into the exam, pick what your guessing letter is. I always pick D. Maybe you want to pick B or A, whichever one you want. So if you don't know the answer, you know that you press D. 2 seconds worth of work. You can then, if you end up with time at the end, which is unlikely, you can come back to it. But by putting something down, you've locked in that 20% chance for that question, and you can move on to something you've got a better chance of getting right. Sorry. That's why pace is so important. It's also important by adopting a strategy like this to build up your confidence. It doesn't seem necessarily very intuitive, but maths in particular is an incredibly confidence-driven subject. If you get to the easy questions early, if you feel like you're getting things right, your confidence in your abilities will rapidly improve and you will genuinely do a lot better. It's difficult in time-pressured exams like this to go back and forth across questions. But if you're ever doing a maths test where you have longer, where you're less time pressured, the first thing you should do is figure out which question is the easiest for you and do that question first. You'll feel much more confident, much happier if you're building up marks, if you're building up confidence. If in an ideal world, you can get to the point where you've passed the test when you've only done 2/3 of the questions because you know you've got them right, because those are the bits you really know, you're going to feel so much happier and more relaxed when you get to the questions that you find harder. If you do it the other way around, If you've done the hard stuff, if you're feeling demoralized, if you're worried that you're going to fail the test, if things are going badly, you're not going to do as well on the questions you do know, because you'll have lost confidence and you'll be having all kinds of horrible emotions going on. So don't do that. It helps to control the environment. These are computer-based tests. Have a little bit of practice with the sample version of the software that's available. Figure out what it's going to be like. Figure out what you're going to wear. Make sure that you have everything under control. So the only thing that is a surprise are the questions. Everything else, if you can make that predictable, that's going to save you a lot of mental energy that you need for that test. And the last thing, as we mentioned a moment ago, it's important to target your revision. Spend your time on the questions that you're finding difficult. Find out which questions take you longer. Find out which questions you get right more often. Figure out the best way to divide your revision time, just like you figure out the best way to divide your test time. The improvements you can make in tests like these from deploying your resources strategically is enormous. You can easily get leapfrog yourself over 10 or 15% of the other students by being smarter at the test than they are. And that gets to my final point. Coming back to what we said at the beginning, you still have so much control over the outcome of these tests, over the outcome of this application process. This test is going to have more weight than your GCSEs do. And the great thing about that is you can still do it. You have a really good opportunity to really improve your performance. As I said, focusing your energy intelligently, it makes such a difference. And remember, you are smarter than this test. If you were given infinite time, you would be able to do this test really easily. None of the questions are that difficult. The difficult part is the time. If you were given 3 hours, you would get 100%. You've got to figure out how to deal with that time pressure and outsmart the test. The test is asking you to do simple things really quickly, and it's hoping that you will panic, that you will manage your time badly. Outsmart it. That's the secret. Now, there is, believe it or not, more to the work we offer here at UniAdmissions than these PowerPoint presentations, which David is going to tell you about now.
Okay, so hello everyone again. Thank you for that, Matt. That was brilliant. So I'm an admissions consultant at UniAdmissions. So I spend all my time on the phone. And if you wanted some help from us, you would call in and you would speak to somebody like myself or one of my colleagues. Now, we have, as you can see on the screen there, premium programs. And essentially they cover we have 4 different pillars, as I like to describe it. They cover all aspects of your application, barring obviously your A-levels, which you'll take care of and your school will take care of. So we cover these with, as I say, 4 different pillars. The first one being one-to-one tuition. That would be with an expert tutor, somebody who has taken the same test that you'll be taking and has scored very highly in that test in the top 10 percentile. And they would be able to help you in all the areas. That's your personal statement, with the test itself and with your interview technique. You would then, the second pillar would be our materials and resources. So that would be our student portal, which is really the hub of our program, and basically where all the online stuff is. And on there you have things like our award-winning books, and we have many, many books, over 120, I believe it is at the moment. And you would be given reading lists. So if you're doing medicine, there's a reading list for medicine, and you would go on and you can have access to all of the books there. You would be able to have access to our past papers. So you can do a timed past paper, sit that, have it, finish it off in the time conditions, upload it, and then have it looked at by one of our tutors who would mark it and critique it for you. The same is true of our personal statement. So you could have a go at your personal statement, upload that, and again, have it looked at by one of our tutors. So I think I've covered everything, the materials and resources there. We also have academies as well. So lots and lots of videos on all different aspects of the application, no matter what subject you're doing. So some help with the personal statement, again, with your test, whichever one that may be. and then also with the interview as well. So a wealth of information on our student portal. The third pillar is our seminars, our weekly enrichment seminars. If you're doing our Head Start program, then you would do them monthly, but for most of our students, they do them weekly. These are small group seminars, so you'd be in roughly groups of 4 to 5, depending on the subject. You would be with the tutor of the subject as well. So again, if you're doing medicine, you would be with other medicine applicants. You'd be with a medicine tutor. You'd be given a topic to discuss each week in medicine or whichever subject you're doing. You'd be given pre-readings and handouts, and you would then be encouraged to discuss the topic in the very same way that you'd be expected to discuss it in your interview. Okay, so really, really good interview help and practice and everything else. So these are so valuable, the seminars. Okay, so finally, we have the courses. We have one-day intensive courses. A lot of our courses have happened already for a lot of tests. I think we have a lot of courses going on this weekend as well. And these are again, courses in different aspects of your application. So we do have a personal statement course, we have a course for your test, and then we also have a course for the interview. The personal statement course and the test courses are 1 days. Quite a lot of our test courses have booster courses as well. So you would have another 1 day course for that. And then our interview course is held over 2 days, and this would include mock interviews, lots and lots of prep and help. And all of these courses are designed to give you that final push into your application and really just solidify everything that you've learned with us up until that point, and really give you the best chance going forward for your application.
Fab. Thanks, David. Yeah, the courses are my favorite part of the year, the chance to see and interact and speak to so many of the students we work with. It's so exciting to see all of those human faces, and really pushes home the work we do and the impact it has. The good news is all of this seems to work. We have success rates that we're really proud of, and they compare really flatteringly with even some of the more expensive schools in the country. We don't quite have the outfits of Eton, but we do have comparable success rates. And I have spoken to Rohan about this, and he still won't let us have the outfits, which is disappointing, to say the least. If you've enjoyed this webinar, please do drop a review on Trustpilot. You can read what other people have had to say about us and get a real sense of the quality of the work we do. And if you do leave a lovely review, I will put your lovely review in these presentations going forward. So you will be, for some months at least, a part of the webinar experience. What an incentive that is. And what we'll do now is we will take a few questions up until 3 o'clock, at which point I'm going to disappear and watch some football. So if you want to just drop those into the Q&A section, I can see we've already had a few, and we will take a look at those. Arian asks about support for the TMUA. We have loads of support for the TMUA available as part of our resources. I think we have over 100 sample TMUA questions, and these are questions that normally take 25-30 minutes. So you could do them all between now and the test, but it will be a lot. Daniela asks, since you don't know your Bmap and UCAT results before applying, should you split your applications between the two tests, so 2 Bmap unis and 2 UCAT unis, or focus on one? So, like you say, it is really unhelpful that you don't know what your results are. What I would say is you should have a sense of how well you've done. Look at your practice tests. It's not a perfect guide. Obviously, you will have done differently in the real thing to how you did in the practice tests, but it is the closest thing you're going to get to an indication. We have information that I'm sure David can share with you if you get in touch directly about the UCAT cutoffs for different universities. And so you can make smart choices in terms of making sure that even if you have performed worse than your kind of average UCAT practice test, that you are applying to universities that you would still be above the cutoff and still be in consideration for. So although it's annoying knowing your test result, it is unlikely that your test result will be wildly different from the practice you've been doing. And so I would use your practice to inform what you think you've done and then make an adjustment to that based on how you feel about the test. If you think it went well and you'll normally get pretty good Bmap marks, then you might want to do 3 Bmaps. But I would generally say that 2 and 2 is a good idea, and to make sure that one of those, probably a UCAT university, is a university that you're really confident that you're going to be above the cutoff score for. And so looking at the universities with lower cutoff scores. Kajay asks about how the Bmap scores are calculated. So for ease of use, I've used the raw scores in this presentation. I don't really like the scale scores. I think the raw scores are much clearer. But the conversion that goes on from the raw scores to the scale scores is very straightforward. So they will mark it between 1 and 9. Each number of correct answers out of 32 is a separate score, and the numbers that are assigned to those scores is scaled based on the number of students that are in that range. So if you have very large numbers of students who are getting, say, 28 and 27, then you'll have a smaller gap in terms of the decimal component of the score scaling. It's complicated and not especially interesting. I don't believe we've written up the research I've done into this as an article yet. So if you're really interested, I will look into doing that, but it is a bit complicated and boring, is the straightforward answer. The easiest thing to do is to have a look at the graphs, and these are available on the Bmap website. And what you'll see, you can figure out the raw scores just by counting the number of columns in the scale score data. It's a little unsophisticated, but it does work. Are there any other questions? That was a very short question round today.
I would
think that means I did a great job of answering them in advance.
Matt, I will just say, if I can, Angel, I believe, asked a question. I don't know if you saw, I answered for you, Angel, but they asked if we do LNAT prep, if we can help with the LNAT, and we definitely can help with the LNAT, no problem.
Absolutely. LNAT is a really good one to practice because it is a slightly weird style of question. It's not the kind of thing you study in school. It uses the same skills you'll be developing in English and history and so on, but it's not the kind of test you will have done before. And so the returns to practice on it are really impressive because it's such an odd test. It's one of those ones where you can really improve your performance by focusing on the different components of it. And so the LNAT is really worth looking at. It's also one, my experience is that students tend to prepare quite badly for the LNAT. And so the number of students you can overtake, so to speak, by getting a few extra questions right can be even more impressive than we see with the Bmap, as a lot of people will not practice for the LNAT properly and things will go surprisingly badly for them. The LNAT, I don't think I'm signed up to do it this year, but in years past I have done the LNAT for fun, not very much fun, as part of our research to sort of test out some of the strategies we try and employ. And the LNAT it's an exam, like I say, that people tend to do a bad job of preparing for, and that means that the returns to preparing for it are really high. If everyone else is a bit mediocre, then you don't need to be as good, basically. And if you are good, you can get some really impressive results. And we have a question about the balance of Bmap and the interview. So this will depend on the university. Some universities will only use the Bmap to decide who they're going to interview. and the decision will then be made entirely based on the interview. Others will do things differently, so the Bmap will still count towards your decision score. Most universities will have this information publicly available on their websites, so it's worth having a look there so that you can figure it out. For Cambridge, I can't remember the exact mechanism for Oxford, but Cambridge, there is a formula, and I do not have it to hand, but again, that's something I will see if we can write up, because the formula is somewhat interesting in itself. And for Cambridge, each of the components does count. So you get a certain number of points for your interview, a certain number of points for your A-level, a certain number of points for your Bmap, and then everyone gets compared based on the score they get based on that formula. I cannot remember off the top of my head, and it's quite fiddly, but it is interesting to see the sort of rigor that goes into it. And Kaija, I will try and dig it out for you, but I can't remember exactly where I've filed it, so it'll take me a minute to do after this. If you want to get in touch with us through a consultation, that's the best way, because that way we'll have an email address for you, a phone number, and then I can email it to you. And finally, yes, we have loads of interview practice available. That is with a whole range of tutors depending on the subject that you're applying for, and those will be tutors different from the ones who are directly teaching you, so that you get to experience a lot of different people, a lot of different interview styles. I think the interview practice is incredibly valuable, because one of the things people do wrong is they won't be frightened enough when they get to the real interview. They'll have practiced with someone they know and trust. When you get to the interview, it will not be someone you know and trust. It will be a weird, scary experience. And while we can't perfectly replicate that, having it with people you've never met before really helps. We had one question about picking between Oxford and Cambridge for medicine. We have, I'm pretty sure, a webinar from a few months ago on this very question. So if you go on the website, you can follow through, look at the recordings of all of these webinars, and hopefully I have answered your question in the past. There are dozens of hours of me presenting these if you want to watch them all, but I think the answer is in there somewhere, and I cannot remember the answer off the top of my head, which of course is why there's a recording. I think that'll do for today. David, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. Thank you everyone for joining. Matt, thank you so much. That was brilliant.
Fab. And we will see some, but probably not all of you next week, when I think we're talking about personal statements, but we might not be. Who knows? Watch out on the website and we'll find out what we're doing. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.